Arlene Foster has said the glorification of terrorism at Sinn Feins Ardèce has made it more difficult to restore power sharing at Stormont. Speaking after meeting Prime Minister Teresa May in Downing Street, the DUP leader said talks between her party and Republicans should begin as soon as possible. But she said any deal had to work for both communities in Northern Ireland and that Sinn Féin's activities weren't helping. At the party's Ardèce in Dublin last weekend, Foyle MP Elisha McCallion described former Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness as a proud member of the IRA. Mrs. Foster said the glorification of terrorism at Sinn Féin's conference does make it more difficult to restore devolution. They may lecture others about rights, but the greatest right of all is the right to life. Sinn Féin have not only supported terrorism in the past, but they continue to eulogize and glorify the murder of innocent people. In a rights-based society where there is equality and respect for everyone, innocent victims should also be treated with respect and not be subjected to such offensive displays. The DUP leader claimed that her party wanted an agreement that could be supported by both unionists and nationalists. "We will not make progress with a narrow focus solely on the demands of nationalism or republicanism," she added. Mrs. Foster described her talks with the Prime Minister as very useful and positive and stressed that her party had no red lines on re-entering an executive. It was made very clear to the Prime Minister that talks must continue, but the internal affairs of Northern Ireland are and will remain a matter entirely for the UK government, the House of Commons and the parties in Northern Ireland, she said. Speaking in Downing Street after Sinn Féin met Mrs. May, Gerry Adams denied there was a glorification of anyone at the Ardèce. "I also, standing outside the office of the British Prime Minister, want to refute the use of this term terrorism," he said. Pejorative terms like that, which are about the sons and daughters of families, husbands and wives of families who happen to serve in the Irish Republican Army and who died in the conflict, I don't use those terms. So let's have a wee bit of sense about this. The Sinn Féin delegation included the party's Stormont leader, Michelle O'Neill, the party's deputy leader Mary Lou MacDonald, Conor Murphy MLA and Ms. McCallion. Ms. O'Neill described the meeting as very robust and frank. She said, "We told Mrs. May that direct rule was not an option and that she must look to the provisions of the Good Friday Agreement for the establishment of an intergovernmental conference involving the Irish and British governments." In a statement, the Prime Minister said both Sinn Féin and the DUP had expressed their commitment to seeing Stormont back up and running. Divisions between the two parties were relatively small in number, focusing mainly around culture, legacy, identity and the future stability of the devolved institutions, she added. Meanwhile, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar said he would call a meeting of the Intergovernmental Conference in the new year if there was no restoration of devolution. Speaking in the Dáil, he said he had told Mrs. May last week that his government could not accept a return of a pre-Good Friday Agreement form of direct rule. The conference, which consists of ministers from both governments, met regularly from 2002 until 2007, when devolution was suspended. The DUP has described the conference as a talking shop. Earlier, in an interview with the BBC, Mrs. Foster accused Mr. Varadkar as being reckless as Brexit talks entered a critical phase. Belfast Telegraph.